The Torah calendar is so much simpler than people make it out to be. In scripture, we see that the first month is called Ha-Aviv, or the month of the Aviv, proving that the calendar is at least partially agricultural in nature. We see this in Exodus 13:4, in 23:15, 34:18, and Deuteronomy 16:1. The Israelites were commanded to keep Passover on the 14th of that month. What is Aviv? It is a stage of development for the barley crop. It is how we can know to declare the head of the year. Now, Aviv just means green in the ear. So we're looking to make sure that the grain would be green rather than the stalk, and we're looking at the barley in the land of Israel. We see this in Exodus chapter 9 and verses 31 through 32, and Exodus chapter 12 verses 1 and 2. Now, scripture makes it clear that the first fruits of barley must be able to be harvested 2 to 3 weeks after the start of the new year. In Deuteronomy 16:9, we see that the Israelites should begin taking the, quote, sickle to the standing grain. Now in Leviticus 23:15, we see that the sickle would commence to the standing grain the first day of the week after the Passover. This is the exact same day when the Omer offering, or the single wave sheaf offering from the first fruits, takes place, and this is when we would begin the Feast of Weeks, because Deuteronomy 16:9 says to cut and then to count and to count and cut simultaneously. Note that this should be the first fruits of barley, and as stated previously, the barley should be green in the ear. We see this in Exodus 23:19 and Leviticus chapter 2 and verse 14. What Leviticus 2:14 is saying is that the priests could bring the sheaf offering when the barley was capable of either being parched in fire, this is Aviv Kalui, or if the weather conditions were terrible and it was purple barley, they could bring Gerez Carmel, which basically is a grape or wine color. Now, it's really important to note that no one is allowed to eat of the upcoming year's crop until the first fruits have been brought by the farmers, and we see this in Leviticus 23:14. They're supposed to deliver the first fruits to the priest, and there is no harvest until that is taken care of. And so think about it. If there was a famine and the first fruits were not offered in their appropriate time, then the people would starve. Now, disclaimer, Yom Teruah is not Rosh Hashanah. That is a fall feast, and a lot of Jews, they have 2 New Years, but the Bible does not tell us to have 2 New Years. It does not tell us to have a new year in the fall season. So this is adding to the Torah, which is prohibited by the Torah. Now, Rosh Hashanah is an appropriate Hebrew term to use for the head of the year, or the head of months, and Rosh Hodesh would be the head of a month. So it would be the start of a month. So we have the start of the year, and we also have the start of each month. Now, the Hebrew word Hodesh means new moon. So we are looking at the moon cycles to determine the head of the year as well as the head of each month. And we're also looking at the Aviv barley. So putting all this data together, we are looking for the barley to become Aviv in the land of Israel, and for the first sliver crescent new moon, and that's when we start our stopwatch. So once the head of the year commences, we've got our calendar calibrated correctly, and all we have to do to get to the feast of the 7th month is count 6 more new moons, and then count appropriately according to the instructions in Leviticus, which would just be 10 days to the Day of Atonement, 5 more days to get to the Feast of Tabernacles, and then 7 days of that feast, and then 1 day to get to the 8th great day, which calls for an assembly and a Sabbath. And the calendar really is that simple. It's just looking at the agriculture, observing or shomering the moon, and it really is that simple. That's the way that God wanted it to be for us. In Genesis chapter 1 and verse 14, it says he gave the sun, moon, and stars for signs and for seasons. So there you have it. And finally, let's test out to make sure what I said is true. So here we see that Hodesh means new moon or new month. Let's read Exodus 9:31 and 32. Now the flax and the barley were ruined, for the barley was in the ear and the flax was in bud. But the wheat and the spelt were not ruined, for they ripen late. Wheat comes ripe around Shavuot, so we're not going to bother focusing on that right now. I can do that in another teaching. Now, recall that we found that in the Strong's Concordance, Hodesh means new moon. So let's read Exodus 12:1, where instead of saying month, we say moon. Now let's see it. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe and Aharon in the land of the Mitzrayim, now that's Egypt, saying, this new moon is the beginning of new moons for you. It is the first new moon of the year for you. Now recall that in the very beginning of this video, I mentioned Exodus 13:4, which says, this day came ye out in the month Abib. So we see that we need the new moon and the barley, those two elements, shabam. Now, if you're looking for a faithful witness to help you with declaring the head of the year, this woman lives in the land of Israel. Her name is Rivka Bitterman. I hope you can use this as a resource. Shalom.